title of this project was Coupling Community Knowledge with Big Data Tools to Facilitate Equitable Energy Transitions. So thank you to everyone for attending, and we're very pleased to present the findings from this project. So next slide. I think we've introduced almost everybody on our team, but I do want to make note that we had two really fantastic researchers that aren't here on this call working on this project. So Lauren Strug, who are at database development, and Hannah Gustafson, who is involved in the website development. So I wanted to recognize them. Next slide. And I want to mention our project partners. You've heard from a few of them, Liberty Hill Foundation. We also had Active San Gabriel Valley, Asian Pacific Islander Forward Movement, East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, Pacoima Beautiful, Trust South LA, the Social Justice Learning Institute, and support from Grid Alternatives. So thank you to all our project partners. So quick outline of the presentation. I'm just going to first cover the project purpose and the link to the state's climate goals, and then followed by a brief overview of the products that were developed through this research. And then I'll describe the stakeholder engagement process, followed by Dr. Fournier, who present on the details of the community solar opportunities mapping tool. And then finally, Professor Pincetl will discuss the findings and the recommendations that have emerged from this work. So the project was designed to enable an equitable energy transition, and specifically for under-resourced communities in which the barriers to rooftop solar are very well documented. Next slide. So our project facilitates the selection and design of community solar installations and islandable resilience centers, both of which contribute to the state's goals of greenhouse gas emissions reduction by generating clean energy adjacent to areas of consumption. And this reduces the need for additional transmission line investments. It reduces the ecological impacts of utility scale solar. And the resilience centers with islandable solar and storage can also replace dirty and dangerous diesel backup generators. And these solutions are particularly essential in underserved and low-income communities who are the most vulnerable to increased high heat days. So there were several main products that were developed through this research. The first is the Community Solar Opportunities Mapping Tool, which is a publicly available tool that builds on the UCLA Energy Atlas and which covers the Southern California Edison territory within LA County. So that's an area of over 5.5 million people. It allows the identification of community solar and resilience centers on institutional, government-owned, and community-oriented parcels with extensive contextual information to incorporate equity considerations. It incorporates SCE grid infrastructure data and identifies limitations on distributed solar installations, either in front of or behind the meter. So as I mentioned, Dr. Fournier will be presenting more details and a live demo in a few minutes. To facilitate the stakeholder engagement process, we developed an Energy 101 training curriculum that covers the fundamentals of the energy system structure and governance. And I'll explain a bit more about this and how it ties into our stakeholder engagement process in a few moments. And finally, we published work through this article in 2020, and that was the results of an analysis of historic and projected energy transitions in the residential sector. If anybody needs a copy of that, we'd be happy to provide it. So our stakeholder engagement process. We started this project back in 2018, and we used a three-phase engagement process. So in partnership with Liberty Hill Foundation, we first solicited interest and identified community-based organizations that wanted to participate. And in the second phase, we held a series of 4 workshops, each of which involved Energy 101 training at the start, followed by a discussion of the tool. And we started out with a prototype of that tool that was developed through a previous Energy Commission grant. And the Energy 101 training helped our project partners to better understand the significance of the grid-related data layers, as well as the key regulatory issues and controls that drive or constrain the energy transition in their community. And as we got feedback on what was important to our partners, we made changes to the tool and presented an updated version at the next meeting. And we also documented all the feedback and explained how it was incorporated into the tool or why it couldn't be. The third phase involved 6 of our core partners working with the tool to identify and prioritize sites in their neighborhoods and continuing to provide feedback on content and usability. We also organized presentations by SCE and the Clean Power Alliance, and that's the CCA in LA County, on their programs related to community solar and resilience centers. And the diagram at the top right illustrates this iterative process that characterized our engagement work. Next slide. So we can't emphasize enough how fundamental these partnerships were to the project. They were the key to ensuring that the work was relevant, meaningful, and usable. It was also important to us that our engagement process reflected our principles and values. We value fairness, and with guidance from Liberty Hill Foundation, fully compensated our project partners for their time and input. We value reciprocity, and so we developed the Energy 101 curriculum to share our knowledge and create a two-way street. And we believe in accountability, and so we fully documented and responded to all the feedback that we received. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Eric Fournier, who will talk in detail about the tool. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so the Community Solar Opportunities Mapping Tool is an interactive web GIS platform that has been developed using a commercial mapping product called Carto. The meat and potatoes of the tool is an interactive Carto map that is embedded within a UCLA-hosted website. And that website has been designed to provide a lot of background and contextual information about how the tool was built, what its intended purpose is, and also provide tutorials and guidance as to usability of its various components. There are numerous underlying spatial data layers that had to be integrated to create the data set that powers the map. These were acquired, screened, pre-processed using a variety of analytical packages and techniques. Among the key raw input data sets include SCE data about grid infrastructure from their distributed renewable energy planning portal, aggregated and privacy protected electricity usage data from the Energy Atlas, layers from the Los Angeles Regional Imagery Acquisition Consortium called LARIAC that include building footprints and parking lot outlines, information about rooftop solar potentials from the Los Angeles County Solar Map, building attribute information from the LA County Assessors Database, and then information about the location of disadvantaged communities from the Cal EnviroScreen Score program. So as Felicia mentioned, the version 1.0 of this tool was developed largely without such a comprehensive stakeholder engagement process as part of a previous California Energy Commission grant. And because we didn't have that intensive stakeholder engagement, we felt that there are a lot of opportunities to improve the tool, to grow it, to make it more usable. And that was why we submitted a proposal for funding for this version 2.0. This version 2.0 tool is significantly different in that it does not try to capture information about the total solar potential of all of the buildings in LA County, but it is instead focused on allowing the users to hone in on specific buildings within an area of interest and get detailed information about the potential for those buildings to function as a community solar anchor location or the location of a resilience center. So again, just an overview of the workflow. We start with the parcel use type information and we restrict those parcels, filtering out ones that correspond to these designated use types of what we call eligible sites. And those include institutional, government-owned, and community-oriented properties, places like schools and parks and churches and fire stations and things like that. You'll see in more detail. And then we use data from the LA County Solar Map and also do some of our own analytics to generate estimates of how much solar could be placed on the rooftops and the parking lots of those eligible sites buildings. We then link the locations of those sites to the adjacent grid infrastructure and assess the capacity of that infrastructure to interconnect solar in different configurations, whether it be in front of or behind the meter. And then also we provide, as I mentioned, additional context about building energy usage and the location of disadvantaged communities from the Calendar screen. So this is just a sort of quick snapshot of some of the huge underlying data sources that had to be processed to do this. There are over 2.4 million parcels in LA County with many more buildings, and there are thousands of distribution circuits. And so there's a lot of analytics that go into what you're about to see. So this is the landing page of the site. And after this presentation is over, I would invite all of you to check it out. We'll provide the web link shortly, but I think the best way to interact with this is going to be for me to do a live demo very quickly. So I'm just going to switch the share here briefly. Okay. So this is the live version of the site. We just actually pushed an update to it this past week that significantly expanded the scope of the eligible sites under consideration and also expanded the functionality of the site. So it's a much better tool, and it is evolving all the time because this is an evolving landscape. So many of the data layers that you're going to see are actually updated at regular time intervals to capture changes in the energy system and changes in the built environment. So as I mentioned, there's multiple pages. We have an about page that describes the background and introduces some of the partners that were participating in the project and instrumental in the tool's development. We have a very detailed methods page, which describes a lot of the underlying data sources, how they were acquired, how they were processed, some of the key assumptions that were involved in terms of getting to the outputs that you see on the site. We also have a tutorial page that has very visual guidance as to how to use this particular web-based GIS platform, and also provides information in terms of troubleshooting if you run into issues with performance or get down a blind alley in terms of using the map. The solar map is the main map page, and here we have just a button that'll scroll down to the map, which is at the bottom of the page. Or we can also click up to go back to the top. In between, we have a list of sort of tutorial guidance that provides you with information for how to answer common questions that you might have. So finding eligible sites within my city or finding sites within the Clean Power Alliance territory. Along these lines, I think the best way to illustrate the way that the map can be used is just to work through an example of finding a site that could function in a certain purpose. So for example, one of the communities that we've been working closely in as part of another grant is the city of El Monte, and we've been trying to figure out good locations for siting a resilience center in that city. So let's just, for example, work through that process. And in the process of working through that example, I will illustrate various features of the site, though not all of them because we don't have enough time. So where is El Monte? So I can go to the bottom of the site here, and we have a geocoding toolbar, and I can click El Monte, and the site will find that location, and I can zoom in. And we see highlighted in purple are all of the properties that fit those use type designations that I previously described. So again, institutional, government, and community-oriented properties. So here, there's actually a number of different cities that are located in this area, and so I can turn to these widgets that are located on the right side, and I can see, okay, we've got El Monte, Rosemead, etc. If I'm only interested in El Monte, I can style this here, see where the boundaries of the city are, and I can actually check that against this contextual map that shows where those boundaries exactly are. And I can restrict the sites that are within view. by clicking on this. And so you'll notice when I do that, these numbers that are being calculated above are dynamically recalculated. So I can see that, of the 8,000 or so sites that are located in the whole county, there's about 166 that are inside the city of El Monte. Okay, so again, I mentioned we are interested in resilience centers, and there's actually programs that are available to sort of help bootstrap the development of resilience centers and community solar facilities, specifically within disadvantaged communities. So I might like to know, where are the locations of those disadvantaged community census tracts based upon the CalEnviro screen? We provide that here as a layer, so you can see where those census tracts are. I can click on them and I can see what the tract ID is, what the score is, the population of the tract, et cetera. Now, there's a few sites here that are actually within the city of El Monte, but not inside those disadvantaged census tracts. So I may want to filter them out, right? So again, we have another widget here that provides the opportunity to do that. So I can just click and drag, and what that'll do is restrict the sites to only those that are located within census tracts that have these composite scores above the 75th percentile and thus are located within DAX. And even further, I can color those and see which are actually the most disadvantaged in terms of having those highest scores within that range, right? So moving on, if we're thinking about developing a resilience center, one issue that we've come across is that you have to think a lot about what is the property currently being used for, and is it a place that community members would turn to go to and be comfortable going to in the advent of a power outage, let's say. And what we found is that among the most attractive properties in this sense tend to be educational properties. So we have these two widgets that expose the use type, both general and detailed. And so what I can do here is say, well, I really only think that these resilience centers make sense if they're developed at schools. So I can filter and select only the educational properties. And then maybe I want to say, I think just elementary schools make the most sense. Well, here we go. I'm gonna just refresh some of these things because I'm using a lot of bandwidth doing this with the video on at the same time. And we're gonna have different types of elementary schools here. And I can see them and sort of parse them out and look at the different options that we have available. And so there's lots of other contextual information, and I'll just sort of finish by saying, okay, well, which of these schools have the greatest potential to generate solar? We expose that both in terms of solar that could be built on rooftops, but also solar that could be built on parking lot structures. And then we provide a measure of the total. And so I'm going to visualize these sites and color them from red to green in terms of, worst to best by what's their combined solar potential. And I can see, oh, okay, we've got one here that stands out as a good option. So I'm going to zoom in, and the base map dynamically is providing additional contextual information about where these types of institutional properties are. So it's only identifying churches and schools and things like that. And we actually have information here on the side about the location of Superfund.
I think Eric froze.
Yeah, Eric, if you can hear us, you've frozen. Maybe turn off your video.
You're on mute, Eric. We can see you.
Apologies for that. Can we all see where we're at now? Okay.
Yes. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so let's just finish this example quickly. By clicking on any site, I can get a huge amount of contextual information about it, information about whether or not it's in the CPA territory, information about the distribution circuits, which are located adjacent to it, and their capacity constraints. I can also close this and bring up information about the housing attributes in the local area. So for example, what is the average household size? What percentage of renter households do we have? All kinds of information like that. And then finally, information about electricity usage among sort of on a per capita basis, but also in terms of the renter households that are in that local area. So the idea here is, if I were to actually develop this property and all of the solar potential that it has, what would that buy me in terms of offsetting the energy use of people in that local community that perhaps can't install solar on their own homes? So I think that is, I'll stop there for now because it seems like we might have bandwidth issues, and return to the presentation. And then I think we'll turn over to Dr. Pincetl.
Thank you. You can see that this tool has really a lot of content and provides an extraordinary insight into what's possible within the existing situation today. But what we're going to tell you about is how difficult it might be to accomplish and fulfill that potential. So as you can see, our key findings and recommendations are really a result of working with our project partners, getting their feedback and their priorities, without whom this tool would not be what it is at all. The evaluation of what we are finding with the tool compared to and within the context of regulatory and policy challenges. And the findings are an outcome of analysis of the solar potential and grid limitations identified by the tool. So of course, like any tool, it's based on one snapshot in time, and as Erica said, we are constantly trying to make sure that it's accurate and up to date. That takes a lot of vigilance and understanding. So it may, if you see things that we have not addressed, we would love to have you contribute to that. And while our methodology reflects the best data available, there's still unavoidable uncertainties, but we've made very conservative assumptions wherever possible. And we think that really this work is probably the most direct and easy way to perceive what the possibilities are within the existing built environment to achieve greenhouse gas emissions, better equity in terms of access to solar, distributed solar resilient centers. And though we have to say it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve because of the policy changes that are going to be needed in current conditions. So the key findings include the following. We think, as I just said, an essential need for CBOs, but also local governments. Well, our clients and our partners were local governments. As we watch counties develop safety elements to address grid outages, to address high heat, to address fire hazards and so on, the question of resilient centers is starting to pop up throughout the state. And so the tool also can help local governments determine, where these could be built. And there's no other tool that we know of that can achieve that kind of functionality. What we find is that it's very hopeful, actually. 3.5 gigawatts of technical solar potential is available on institutional, government-owned, and community-oriented properties in Edison territory in LA County. And this is not all the residential rooftops, right? And so what we were very cognizant of is that there are a lot of rooftops, particularly in underserved communities, that are either unavailable because they aren't owned they're rental properties, or rooftops are in various conditions, all kinds of obstacles. And so really what it shows is there's a lot of potential within the already built up environment. And that This 3.5 gigawatts, the cumulative production, is sufficient to offset the electricity use of all 362,000 renter households in DAC census tracts within that same territory on an annualized basis. That's quite significant. But, and here's the troubling part, the build out will be substantially constrained by current grid capacity and Rule 21 protocols as defined and interpreted by Southern California Edison. We find that for community solar installed in front of the meter, 33% of this total potential would be constrained based on circuit ICA capacities. And for resilient centers installed behind the meter, 86% of total solar potential for these centers would be constrained from development based on Rule 21 limitations. And this is a very disturbing finding, actually, because of the need for these resilient centers going forward. Additional constraints, this is kind of bizarre, actually, when you dig into it. PUC rules don't permit a single solar installation to function as both community solar and a resilient center. This strikes us as extraordinarily inefficient. It's kind of defies logic why there should be two different installations when one could accomplish serve two needs. Furthermore, PUC rules don't permit storage to be installed as part of solar PV systems developed under community solar programs. It's a puzzling rule. Next. Can we move to the next slide, please?
Oh, I'm wondering if Eric's having a bandwidth problem again.
Oh,
no,
here we go. Thank you. Utility programs are clearly insufficient to meet community needs, and Felicia can tell you a lot more about that if you are interested in knowing that. And their complexity is a substantial barrier to solar development. Planning for community solar and resilient centers is extraordinarily detailed and time consuming, and there's a dearth of resources available at the local level for this work. So we recommend a number of things. Some of these are going to be completely obvious. We feel that this community solar opportunities mapping tool would be useful statewide, and it would be great if it was expanded statewide. We should really prioritize the build out of this enormous resource of institutional, government-owned, and community-oriented solar potential. The Public Utilities Commission should direct utilities to allow a single solar installation to function as community solar during normal grid operations and an islandable resilient center during grid outages, hence the need for batteries. Community solar tariffs must be allowed to include the batteries to support the overwhelming need for energy storage. We know that last summer we had to curtail energy use because of high demand, and partly because we have insufficient battery storage and battery availability during these periods of high demand. And community solar programs should be greatly expanded. The rules should be simplified. So some of the ways in which this could be possible, and I'm sure we are only scratching the surface here, is the Public Utilities Commission could require utilities to offer programs facilitating resilient centers. It could revise regulations and make financing available through ratepayer funds. We do that for energy efficiency and conservation programs. So why not to facilitate the creation of these facilities? At the same time, maybe OPR or SGC could use cap and trade funding to support local governments and CBOs in the construction of these facilities. Grid capacity for distributed solar should be reevaluated through a public, transparent, and open process so that, first of all, we all understand very clearly how the utilities, and particularly SCE, interprets grid constraints. It's a kind of behind a curtain set of calculations that are not made public, and that their interpretation is consistent and defensible. We don't know really if certain neighborhoods seem to be more curtailed than others because of the way the rules are applied. It's a very mysterious process, and yet these decisions have enormous public impacts. And I think that's our future work. Well, we would love to continue enhancing this tool with improved filtering capabilities and more current data. And like I said, if you have any suggestions and ideas for us going forward as you look at the tool and use it, we would be thrilled to get those kinds of inputs. We're working on a journal article. We are academics after all. We also are developing webinars for local governments and agencies that are interested on how to use the tool and on some of the constraints that exist to developing these enormous resources. We would be thrilled to expand the tool beyond LA County and feel that it would be an important resource for the state going forward. We are probably going to be building out the Energy 101 curriculum for broader application. There are a number of groups and entities interested in this curriculum, because as more people become more involved with the energy system, it's really difficult to do so if you don't understand it very well. There's lots of misinformation out there and obfuscation that a better understanding of the actual situation would help. And we intend to write a white paper on our policy findings and recommendations and work with our CBO partners in doing so, and really, and if I may say so, popularize our findings so that there are more eyes on this situation so we can facilitate the potential that exists. And with that, we would love to get from you questions, discussions, suggestions, and we'll open up the floor. And Felicia, are you going to take the questions, or and Nicole?